I'm excited to be here today for Wednesday, September 11th, a dubious day in American history, but it also happens to be Megan's birthday. So I wanted to wish Megan, well, obviously I wish Megan happy birthday, but yeah, I'm celebrating Megan today, my partner. And I'm just excited to celebrate her birthday today. I hope you all are doing well in September here. It turned into autumn here in St. Louis all of a sudden. We went from a very hot summer to just autumn, beautiful autumn. And so it's been a rather nice couple of days. We spent a lot of time outside this weekend going to, we played disc golf as we often do, but we also played pickleball, which we rarely do, but had a blast doing with a few friends who have been wanting to find a sport or activity to do outside. So we had a great time doing that. And then we actually had dinner out on an outdoor patio this weekend as well. The weather was really, really nice here in St. Louis. Steve says, what's the chocolate of the day today? Steve, what is that? Well, okay, I do know. For Megan's birthday, we're getting some tartlets, some little chocolate. I think they're going to be like chocolate pudding tartlets. I haven't seen them yet, so I'm curious to see what they look like. But I think there'll be a couple different varieties of chocolate among these tartlets that I'm really looking forward to trying. And obviously, we'll yield to Megan because it's her birthday. Also, over this past weekend, it was the anniversary of a much sadder occasion than a birthday. It was the anniversary of when Biddy passed away last year, my dear cat. So that was Saturday. So I had a good, not a good, but a weekend of looking back through memories and videos and photos and things like that to remember, to celebrate how special Biddy was to me. I'm sure those of you who have had that special pet in your life can relate to that. Yeah. In terms of Stonemaier Games, I have some topics in the subject line today. I mentioned pickleball, shipping update for Stamp Swap and the apiary expansion. So Miniature Market in the U.S. or Fulfillment Center and Warehouse in the U.S. has been shipping out very quickly. I think they are almost done with their shipments at this point. Europe, Spiral Galaxy in Europe, I'm looking over at my email to see the latest update, but they're working on it. They still have a few hundred orders to get through, but I think they had a holiday on Friday or Monday, so they should be getting through most of them this week. And then there are maybe 200 orders or so split between Canada and Australia that are still shipping out. But if you're a champion, odds are you've either gotten a shipping notification already, or you will get a shipping notification within the next couple of days. By the end of this week, I think all champions should have gotten their shipping notifications. So yeah, that is the shipping update for apiary expansion and Stamp Swap. I've already heard a few people getting their copies of Stamp Swap and even getting it to the table already, which is really exciting. Yesterday, I filmed my how to teach Stamp Swap video to help those of you who want to see my method, at least, for teaching someone else how to play. And so I'll have that video go live tomorrow, I think, will be my how to teach video for Stamp Swap. Oh, it's a special day for Chad as well. He's celebrating. A year ago today, he brought his son Owen home. That's wonderful. That's already been a year. That's incredible, Chad. Congratulations on that. Joshua said that he sounds like your delivery person must just deliver during livecast. So Joshua had a Stonemaier package arrive during the livecast. Barwin says that they received their copy of Stamp Swap and already got to play it twice. That's amazing. Thank you for playing twice already. We have game night tonight. So obviously it's Megan's birthday, so she'll get to choose the game, but Stamp Swap will be an option to play if she wants to play it. Ryan says that he just got his 50th play of Wingspan. That's incredible. Congratulations on your 50th play. Garrett says, punching Stamp Swap made me realize just how incredible Stonemaier Games punch. I feel like no other publisher has the pleasant punching experience that Stonemaier Games and Panda provide. And really, I should give full credit to Panda there. While we do have some decisions about the type and thickness of the punch boards that we use, Panda is the one that has the die cut machines that make sure they punch cleanly and things like that. So I'm glad to hear that. I agree that Panda does a great job with punch boards, and I'm really happy with their quality as well. Martin Poole is getting his copy of Stamp Swap at Essen, and he's right. We will have Stamp Swap, we'll have the apiary expansion, we'll have Wormspan, we'll have Gears of Corruption, the standard version, I believe. We'll have all that stuff at Essen Spiel in less than a month now, coming up pretty soon. Are any of you attending the convention in the near future? I won't be there, but my coworkers Alex and Dave will be there. Let me throw out my question of the day. I have a couple questions of the day to you. Some of them are a little fun. Let me start off with a heavier one. Well, let's start with a lighter one. we have the Stonemaier Games Design Day coming up in the near future. This is an annual event that we host at Pieces Board Game Bar and Cafe in St. Louis, where people come and bring games to playtest, and playtesters come to playtest those games and offer feedback. It's a really great day. I really enjoy this day. And I am thinking about doing a video on my favorite games that have been showcased at some point, been play tested at some point at Design Day, and have since been published. So I'm going to read those games to you really quick, and you can let me know what your favorite is in the comments. So I think there are about a dozen of these. I don't have a good way to post them on the screen, so I'll just read them out loud. So these are all games that have appeared at Stonemaier Games Design Day by various publishers, various designers, and went on to be published. Distilled, and you'll see some Stonemaier games on this list too. Distilled, Stamp Swap, Pendulum, Red Rising, Apiary, Fromage, Legacies, Cytosis, Search for Planet 9, Periodic, Honey Buzz, Between Two Castles, and Subatomic. There might be others that I'm missing from that list. I included ones that have been at Design Day that I've also played. I definitely am missing some from that list. So feel free to add it if I made a mistake there. But let me know your favorite game from that list. Distilled, Stamp Swap, Pendulum, Red Rising, Apiary, Fromage, Legacies, Cytosis, Search for Planet 9, Periodic, Honey Buzz, Between Two Castles, and Subatomic. I will see if I can just post this list in the comments of the chat. It might be a long comment, but that might... Oh, there we go. Okay, it's kind of jammed together, but you can see in the comments that list. Yeah. Tim says, what do I suppose is the source of pleasure of punching out games? I remember as a kid punching some war-type tiles, feeling and loving it. I don't know. I think there's something... I don't know. I think there's something psychological about it, about taking something that is whole and making it even more complete, because now you have these things that you can actually use. But I don't know. I think I'd be curious to hear people's questions about that. Darth Grogu says, do I go to any conventions? I do, but not many. The main convention that I go to the Stonemaier Games Design Day, and I also go to Geekway to the West here in St. Louis, which is the type of convention that I am kind of looking for in general, as if I do attend more conventions in the future, which is a convention where I just go and play games with a variety of people for a few days. Ideally games that are new to me, but not necessarily new to me. But that is my ideal type of convention. Geekway has around, I think they have around 2,000, 2,500 attendees. And so I think in general, I'm looking for conventions that have between 1,000 and 3,000 people, and that kind of mid-range size, that are focused on just playing games with a variety of people. And ideally also somewhat flexibly, like not where you have to sign up for a bunch of events in advance, just where you go, they have a good library, they have a good play and win section, and you just play a lot of games for a couple of days. That's the type of convention that I found that I really enjoy, at least with Geekway. Carlos says, have you noticed that expansions designed to fit within the original games box tend to sell a higher percentage relative to the original game sales compared to those that don't? Carlos, I have a very limited data set about that, so I can't say for sure if that is true or not. Most of in fact, most of the expansions that we've made at Stonemaier Games do fit within the original game box. The outlier would be Tuscany, perhaps. Tuscany does actually fit into the viticulture box, so that, yeah, I don't know if I have a good data set to reply about that, Carlos, because most of our expansions do fit, and the only data sets I have really are from Stonemaier Games. Awesome, Chris. I'm excited to see you at Design Day again this year. Glad you can make it. I see answers to the question here. I realize that this is going to be tough for me to actually track the answers to my question about your favorite game that has appeared at Design Day, but I am seeing your answers at least, and I appreciate you sharing them. Yeah, thank you. So Angela is wondering what the question is for the list of games. The question is, those are games that have appeared at some point at the Stonemaier Games Design Day. Not all Stonemaier games, just Stonemaier games, designers that show up to playtest their games at that day. Those are games that have gone on to be published that I've also played that have appeared at Design Day. So I'm curious what your favorite of those is. Brandon says that Terminal City Tabletop Convention in Vancouver. I've always wanted to go to Vancouver. Brandon, is that the style of convention that I'm talking about here? I am literally creating a running list of conventions like this. So Terminal City Tabletop in Vancouver. Let me make a note about that. Terminal City in Vancouver. And when is that typically held? Yeah. Wait, what's the timing of that convention normally? Jeff says, am I planning to go to Geekway Mini in January? So Geekway to the West, this roughly 2,000 person convention in May or June, also has a miniature version in January. I sometimes attend, I sometimes don't attend. Jeff, I'm leaning towards attending this year if I can get in. I think it's, it can sell out pretty quickly because it's only around 400 people, but I hope so. Are you going? Awesome. Brianna confirms that is the vibe for, okay, and mid-March for that convention in Vancouver. Awesome. I also have AirCon on my list, which is also at least one of the AirCons in England is in mid-March as well. So I believe that is also this type of convention. Ryan says his son is excited to get the numbered copy of Stamp Swap. I have other games from Stonemaier Games that were from the first print run, but not numbered. What determines if a game gets numbered or not? So many of our games are numbered from the first print run. Usually, and there are a few different guidelines here. One is if we offer two versions of the game out of the gate, like a standard version and a deluxe version, only the deluxe version is numbered. That's part of the consideration. For Wormspan, we didn't number it for reasons that maybe were incorrect on my part. I didn't number it because I thought we were making so many copies of Wormspan in the first printing that it wouldn't feel special to have number 89,000 out of 100,000 copies. But a lot of people said, like, they actually, after that, they said, hey, why aren't there numbers on these boxes? This is a first run copy. And I think they were right. So in the future, I decided to do that anyway. So Rolling Realms Redux, I believe, has individual numbering on it. Stamp Swap does. And it's only new games, not new expansions. So most games do. There isn't a good reason, I think, at this point that we wouldn't do it for the first printing of a game. And I'm trying to think of, except for the deluxe standard divide there in some cases. Let's see. Charity says Sioux City GeekCon has a little fewer people than what I'm looking for, but the library and play and win section was phenomenal. I've heard great things about the convention, and really the size isn't a huge factor. In fact, I generally don't like giant crowds in general. So perhaps I'll throw this out there to you and let you know what you think about this. So if I start going to more conventions like this, just to go and play games with a variety of people for a few days, part of it is just for fun. Part of it is for me to learn from a variety of games as a designer that I haven't played. But part of it is also outreach. Like part of it is my job, like outreach and just hanging out with people and making connections with people in fun ways. And so my thinking was a little bit like there probably has to be a line, like for me going to for that purpose, the job purpose, going to a very, very small convention might have a lower impact than if I go to a mid-sized convention. But I'd love to connect with 400 people. If it's a 400 people convention, that would be incredible to connect with that many people. And really knowing my social battery, there's no way I can connect with that many people anyway. So that's my thinking behind that number. But I really am flexible about that. So I'll make a note about, oh no, actually that's on my list already. The ones on my list that I think fall into this category are FallCon in Calgary, AirCon in England, Sioux City GeekCon, which is on the list, and Terminal City in Vancouver. That one's now on the potential list. Let's see. Ray says, how have the sales been looking at for the recent releases like Gears of Corruption, Stamp Swap, Apiary Expansion? Are each of them performing more or less like you had hoped? They're pretty much all in line. So Gears of Corruption, we didn't make enough of the Ironclad version. So that's one where we sold more copies than we expected of the Ironclad version. For Stamp Swap, the Apiary Expansion sold exactly as I thought it would do. Stamp Swap was on the consumer web store was a little bit lower than I thought it would do, but I think it was more indicative that Stamp Swap is a really good retail product because it did really well in retail pre-orders. So it seems that a lot of people are talking to their retailers about it. A lot of retailers are very interested in the game. So that one kind of evens out there. And the Apiary Expansion as well. I mean, it's an expansion that is very easy for us to ship, very easy for us to get to people, but it is a lower priced product. And so the ratio of the cost of the product compared to the shipping cost isn't great. And so I think a lot of people might be just picking that up from their local retailer as well, or adding it to their preferred online retailer order. Yeah. Devil's Treasure already got their APR expansion Stamp Swap and already got in their first game as well. That's awesome. Brandon's really pushing this Terminal City convention in Vancouver. It sounds incredible. Yeah. And yeah, Play and Win, we donate. I do have a huge list of conventions to whom I donate Play and Win games. I go through there once a month and I go through that list and I donate a few of our games to pretty much every convention that fills out that Google sheet on our website for Play and Win. So yeah, I'm aware of all these conventions, but I don't necessarily know the vibe of them. Like I know I have the list, but I don't know the vibe so much. Yeah. Steven says, curious if early playtesting people had preconceived notions that you are expected to fill your board rather than present your pieces. I don't think we heard much feedback about people thinking that they could fill their board in Stamp Swap. Because a lot of the goals are even around like empty spaces and things like that. So no, I don't think that's interesting feedback to hear from you and your group. I don't think I've ever come close to filling my board in Stamp Swap. Ian says, has there ever been a novel based on a board game? He's blanking on it. A novel based on a board game. I mean, I would guess probably, but not that I'm aware of off the top of my head. Good question, Ian. Steve mentions a new game in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, nice and small, only a few hundred people, and on the first weekend of November this year. As for a small, like, come play a lot of games game convention. That's a new game in Oshkosh. Thank you, Steve, for mentioning that one. And Michelle mentions family-friendly conventions with open gaming. Open gaming, yeah, that's the way to say it, open gaming. She likes Tabletop Central in Illinois, not too far from me. FlatCon also in Illinois in mid-October. Yeah, I'll make a note about those. Thank you, Michelle, for doing that. So FlatCon in Illinois, mid-October. Jan William says, now that Rolling Realms Redux has released, what are your plans for the promo packs for Rolling Realms? The box is filled up quite nicely. Will you stop releasing promo realms or continue doing so? So we no longer have plans to make more promo realms based on, I'll leave the question up there, based on non-Stonemaier games, but we do plan to continue to make new realms for new Stonemaier games. And I think you're right. The box is pretty packed. But I think if you use the sidebar area where you keep markers and dice, I think there is enough room there to cover Stonemaier games for the next 5 years or so, hopefully. We don't make many games, so many games over each year, so it shouldn't add up too much. Mark says, if I ever go to the Simon Thailand convention, is that a type of convention where you just go and play games for a few days? It's one I could certainly consider if that's the reason. Darth Kruger says, Play and Win sounds interesting. Is that done as a tournament usually or like a raffle? Right, I'm sorry, I'm throwing out this term without explaining what it is. So Play and Win is when a convention has games, either games that were donated by publishers or that they've acquired because they want to serve their attendees. Sometimes a combination of the two. And at any time during the convention, you can go and check out one of those games and play it. Oftentimes you learn it on the fly, but however you want to do it, you check out one of the games, you play it, and then everyone who plays it fills out a little form. It can be digitally, it can be on paper that says, here's my name, I played this game, and I'm interested in winning it. And then at the end of the convention, those, we'll talk about it in terms of pieces of paper, but like for every one of those games. So if you played Stamp Swap, and say 20 different groups of people played Stamp Swap, at the end of the convention, if there's one copy of Stamp Swap in the Play and Win, the convention runner will draw one of those cards out of a hat, virtually or not, and they'll say, okay, this is the group, and they'll randomly pick one of the names of the people on that group to win Stamp Swap. So it really encourages people to play a wide variety of games, and but when it's run well, only one person can win one game. And so it's not like I can get lucky and win a dozen different games that I played. Once I win a game, I can only win that one game. And so it results in being good for the publishers too, because it exposes people to a lot of games. That's good for the people. People can win free stuff. but also publishers have at least some people who hopefully play the game and enjoy it, but don't end up winning it, and then are inspired to buy it, even potentially at the convention itself, which is good for the vendors at the convention that are selling those games. So that's a very brief overview of how Play and Win works. Eric is an advocate of Grand Con in Grand Rapids, a smaller convention that has an amazing library. Does it have a lot of open gaming? That's what I'm looking for, the open gaming experience at conventions. I have heard good things about Grand Con, so I'll make a note about Grand Con. Garrett says, have you played any new digital games recently? Balatro is coming to mobile later this month, which might be dangerous for his overall productivity. I think the most recent digital game that I played was Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers, a blackjack-themed game. That's a little bit like Balatro, actually, but with blackjack instead of poker. I had a good time with it. I can't remember. I did a video about it recently. I can't remember if the video has come out or not yet. Ivan says, congrats on Stamp Swap. You finally made a game that excels in the I cut you choose mechanism, something that I've been looking to do for a long time. I don't think there's another game that uses this mechanism as a core mechanism, is there? Oh, there are many other games that use I cut you choose as a core mechanism, but not at Stonemaier Games. This is the first one at Stonemaier Games. Yeah, so Luke here has a comment about an article that I wrote. So I wrote an article a couple days ago. I'll leave Luke's comment up. Didn't mean to flash it up there. But on Monday, my article was about controversies. And part of the article was about highlighting some controversies, some situations, some mistakes that I think that people have made. Not to bring those people down in any way, but just to prevent further harm. That's the reason why I think that sometimes things need to be highlighted in a responsible, constructive way. The point of the article was about how to highlight those types of situations in a responsible way, a fact-driven way, an example-driven way, providing context, and sharing the correct factual information about the situation. And so I did that in a few different ways on Monday's post about a few different situations, and Luke is mentioning one of them right here. So that was my article on Monday. My video this past weekend was about games focused on simultaneous play. Not necessarily real time. In fact, I don't know if there are any real time games on there, but simultaneous play where all players are doing whatever they're doing, mostly simultaneously. And then the blog post last week, what was last week's blog post? It was about something that we talked about together, I believe, on this livecast last week. Yes, it was the controversies post on Monday. I'm slowly loading my dashboard here. And we're talking about the shipping lower priced products and how it can be a little difficult. I talked about it with Apiary earlier, where Apiary is a $25 product. Our shipping cost for Apiary are close to $16. We only charge customers around $10 of that, but for their shipping fee. But how that challenge can lead to some solutions, like us recommending that you get the game from a retailer instead of directly from us, or bundling that item together with other items in your cart. And so the shipping cost relative to the cost of what you're buying is a lot lower. So I talked about that on last Thursday. Nate says that his wife is due with their first child. Congratulations, Nate, on your first child. Looking for recommendations for good games to bring to the hospital. Stamp Shop came yesterday, so I think that will be one of them. I think it depends on the table space that you have at the hospital. But I wonder, if anyone else can relate to that, if they've had a similar situation where they were going to be in the hospital, perhaps due to a child, and they wanted some games to play to occupy their time. I was in the hospital this past summer for my appendectomy, but I just worked. I didn't play any games. It was mostly just me there for most of the time, but I did have some nice check-ins from my mom and from Megan. So Mark is talking about the CMON convention or CMON Expo in Thailand. He says, I think it's similar to the one held in the US. I don't really know much about that one either. There's board games, a board game play area. There's board game sell area, some tournaments, and new release highlights as well. I guess my assumption, perhaps my assumption is false here, Mark, but is it not focused mostly on CMON games, or is it focused on open gaming for a variety of games? Ray talks about Between Two Castles and Magic and Ludwig, how it whether or not it uses an I cut you choose mechanism. I don't think it quite does, Ray. I think it has tile drafting and tile selection. And you're right there is cutting, And yeah, I guess I can see where you're going with that. You are drafting two tiles and deciding which tile to put in the castle or the city in between two cities on your right, and then which one to go on the left. I think it's still a little different than I Cut You Choose, where you are grouping two things and someone else is making that decision. Where in between two cities, between two castles, you are part of that decision as to where the cut pieces go. And the cut is always two tiles. It's not like you can put three tiles in one. It's not like you're drafting like five tiles and three are going in one castle, two are going in the other. It's always two tiles. So I would say it's an offshoot of I Cut You Choose, but maybe not the core, maybe not the traditional sense of I Cut You Choose, or the full definition really of it. Ryan says, love letter for hospital game playing. Let's see. Mark says, do I attend quiz nights, or like trivia nights, as we might call them here? I'm glad you attended one and had a blast, Mark. There are a lot of them in St. Louis. I generally do not. I'm not very good at trivia. I have had fun at trivia nights, regardless of that, but I don't often seek them out. No. Brandon says, could you elaborate on your criteria for becoming a Stonemaier ambassador? I know there's a form, but are there specific things that you're looking for in an applicant? So the overall, thank you for that question. Yeah, the overall thing that we're looking for in a Stonemaier ambassador is someone who is at least somewhat passionate about Stonemaier Games, passionate/knowledgeable about Stonemaier Games, and they want to welcome other people into the world of Stonemaier Games. You can do that just by, and a lot of people are ambassadors without even realizing they are. Like they if you teach our games to other people, privately or at conventions and events, you're doing ambassador-like stuff. If you show up in online forums to answer questions and be welcoming to people in like the Stamp Shop Facebook group or places like that, on Board Game Geek, on our website, that's the type of thing that ambassador might do. Some ambassadors also, I reach out to them and I say, I'd like to pay you to proofread. I'd like to pay you to play test. So there are responsibilities and little jobs that can arise from being an ambassador as well. The requirements for being an ambassador beyond that is that we're looking for people who are inclusive, who are welcoming, who are kind and compassionate, and like I said, are at least somewhat knowledgeable of our games and or willing to become more knowledgeable of our games. That's why there's a little test that you have to take to decide to see if you can be an ambassador or not. Scrolling through, looking through a few little questions here. Yeah, Garrett puts this well. Between two castles and between two cities, and we're like, I cut, we choose, rather than I cut, you choose. Well said, Garrett. Nicole says, the blue shirt looks amazing. Thank you. Yeah, this is a shirt inspired by one of the factions of Scythe that I got from Meeple Source a while ago. It's getting a little ragged, but I'm glad you like it. And thank you for playing Stamp Shop already. Nicole is wondering who handles the new shirt concept. So we have a new shirt this year, a new champion shirt that is inspired by Stamp Swap. And a few different people handle it. Sometimes our web developer, who's also a web designer, Dave, handles the shirt designs. And sometimes my friend and artist, Miles Bensky, handles the designs. Miles did the design for the Stamp Swap shirt. And Joe is also involved because Joe works with the printer to find the best way to make the shirt. He looks at color options and different composition options for the different ways that you print on the shirt. So all those people are involved. I'm involved too in the design and editing the design. But yeah, typically the actual artists are either Dave or Miles. Miles is also one of the artists for Red Rising, and he does many of the illustrations for our custom disc golf disc on our web store as well. So Mark clarifies about CMON. He says, very CMON-centered, but other Asian publishers have booths as well, and he got Veil of Eternity there, which isn't a CMON game. Yeah, thank you, Mark, for clarifying that. So my bigger topic today, maybe the less fun topic, but I want to throw it out there, is let's see how to preface this. In some recent conversations, including my recent post about controversies and situations in the board game industry, there still seems to be the perception that reviewers are getting paid to post their opinions. In fact, I can't even tell at this point if that is the perception by some people, if it's just a conspiracy theory that people are spreading, or if people are misspeaking and thinking that and confusing reviews with previews or rules videos or content that is actually paid for content. I reach out to Rodney at Watch It Play and I say, Rodney, I would like to pay you to make a rules video for the game. That is a very different category than Rodney expressing his opinion about a game, which is a review. I don't even know at this point, but I continue to see this message, and I think it's a little dark, and I think it's inaccurate. I know from my experience, I have never asked any reviewer I've never offered money to a reviewer to express their opinion, ever. Never happened. I have paid Rodney to make rules videos. I have what have we paid for? We've paid for playthroughs. I think we paid for a few playthroughs, but for reviews, we have never paid for that. And I've only had one reviewer ever ask us for money for a review. So it seems like an incredibly rare practice. There are exceptions, but I think it's incredibly rare. And yet the perception from some people seems to be that it is a widespread practice in the board game industry. So I am thinking about, and probably will, I already am started to create the form, will want to send out a survey to all the reviewers on our list. I have around 850 reviewers on our review list, to ask them questions about their practices. I want to ask them things like, have you ever been offered money for a review? Have you ever asked for money for a review? Have you ever been paid for, have you ever been sponsored by a publisher and you also posted a review of one of that publisher's games, which I don't necessarily think is unethical. I think it's good to be transparent about it, but I don't necessarily think it's unethical as long as you are transparent about it. Yeah, so I want to ask some questions like that. So in a survey to reviewers about integrity and ethics in content creation, are there any questions that you think I should include there? That's my question to you. Is there anything that you would like me to put on that survey that you'd like to know? That is my question of the day today about something that I'll probably send out today to a bunch of reviewers. Chad says, what do you feel is the key to making a good contract fulfillment game? What is one of the biggest mistakes? A good contract fulfillment game. I don't know if there's just one key, Chad, but I can highlight, I'll highlight two of my favorites that do this. One is Lords of Waterdeep. The other is the Ado. Two games that are kind of compared to one another. Lords of Waterdeep, I think, does contract fulfillment really, really well because whenever you complete one of the quests in Lords of Waterdeep, you aren't just getting victory points. You are also getting something else that varies vastly based on the card. Maybe you're getting more resources. Maybe you are getting victory points. Maybe you're getting an ongoing ability. You're getting something else that lets you feel like by investing heavily in this one thing, I'm not starting over from scratch to work on the next thing. I think that's key. Yado does something really cool where the missions that you're trying to complete in Yado are location based. So if you have a mission that requires a throwing star and X resources and this specific person and this, I don't know, they require a bunch of different things. One of the keys is they often say you have to go to this place. You have to have a worker on this specific location to do it. And that extra element of theme is awesome. Like it really makes you feel like you are going to a certain place to do the thing on the mission. What is one of the biggest mistakes? I would say one of the biggest mistakes is kind of the opposite of what I said for Lords of Waterdeep, where the build up to completing a quest or mission or contract leaves you back at square one after you do, or you have to completely start over with the entire process to make the thing that you want to make for the next contract that you're trying to fulfill. I think each contract or the things that you're doing to fill a contract, there should be some progression there that makes it a little bit easier to fill the next contract, or at least lets you feel like you aren't starting over from scratch for the next contract. Yeah, that's my take on it. Devil's Treasure says, free copy of the game to reviewers is a small compensation. I can see what you're saying. I wouldn't call it compensation. I would call it a necessity for someone to review a game, but it should be disclosed, and it should be, absolutely. I agree. I don't know if that's a question here. I'm looking for questions for reviewers. So I guess the question here is, asking a reviewer, do you always disclose when you have received a free copy for the review? Luke says, I assumed reviewers got paid, but would still give their honest opinion. Do you give honorariums? I'm not quite sure what an honorarium is in this case, Luke, but no, reviewers really, I think it is incredibly rare that someone would offer payment to a reviewer for their opinion. I think it is almost unheard of in the tabletop game industry. I think other things get paid for. If you're paying someone to do a preview, a rules video, a playthrough, though, like non-opinion content, that content is paid content. That is very common. Sponsorships of some channels, that's also, like you can see on All Play sponsors the Dice Tower channel. But reviewers getting paid for their opinions is incredibly rare in the game industry. Mark says, what initiated their path to becoming a reviewer? What are you hoping to learn there, Mark? That's an interesting question there. Austin says, I've likely made the assumption that reviewers are compensated for their review, particularly when the video itself is sponsored by the publisher of the game. I think that's pretty rare, and that's something I want to look at here. I guess, what is the question here, Mark? How are you sponsored by anyone? Have you ever published a review of that game? But I'm curious for an example of that, because I think it's pretty rare. Like I mentioned the Dice Tower a second ago. The Dice Tower does review All Play games. They are also sponsored by All Play. But I think it's almost rare for channels or podcasts to even have a sponsor at all. So I would say it would be unusual for someone to sponsor a one-time review. Like that is the thing that I'm talking about. Payment for a review, a sponsor for a review. I think that is incredibly rare. Yeah. Tabletop Games Blog says, oh, thank you for the recent post about the controversies. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. I've heard from several of the people who I talked about in the post, even though I didn't mention them by name, but I did allude to some things that I think they did that I think were mistakes, that I think could cause harm to others. And that's why I mentioned them. But I did have the pleasure of hearing from some of those people today. William mentions Can'tCon in Kansas City. Inexpensive, small, primarily open gaming. That sounds awesome, William. Yeah. I love the sound of that. And you're right, Kansas City is not far away. Can'tCon. For some reason, I don't think I knew that was in Kansas City. Thank you for mentioning that one. Austin says, before you play seems to make a point to indicate if the review is sponsored or if it was selected by their Patreon members. That's true. I think, and for before you play, they're an interesting one because it's typically, I'm pretty sure that we have paid before you play for a playthrough. But when they've done that, I don't think they've included their impressions, or the intention is not for them to include their intentions or their opinions on that video. It's just for them to post the playthrough of the video. But they should make that transparent either way. Either way, they should say this playthrough was sponsored. But I'd be curious to see if you have an example here of a playthrough that also was a review that was sponsored. I think that's a little bit different. Ian says, do you reveal bias? Yeah, that's something that I want to ask. There are many levels of bias, but I think there's some more levels that are a little bit more overt than others. Like, are you friends with the person who designed this game or who published this game? That I think is something that's important to reveal. Have you ever accepted money from this person? I think that's important to reveal. Things like that, I think, are helpful to reveal. Paul says he's loving Stamp Swap. Did you ever think about making the box smaller, or did you want to keep it a typical box size? So, Paul, that's a good question. It is something that I thought about a little bit, but the constraint is there are two constraints, really. One of the constraints are the mats, the big mats. The box is essentially the size of the mat. So we could have made that folding, but in making it folding, we would have had to make it thicker, and in making that thicker and making the box smaller as a result, we would have had to include more punch boards. The box would have been super, super tall to fit all those punch boards. So I think this was the right size box, but maybe we could have made it I don't even know if we could have made it more shallow, because when you have that many punch boards, they add up so high. You remember when you open the box, you probably saw a lot of punch boards stacked on top of one another. So that's tough to do, to make a smaller box with that. Jeff says, for a question for reviewers, how they prioritize the reviews they do. If they receive a lot of games, how do they manage that list? I really like that, Jeff. And that one is not on my list yet. So I'm going to add that one to the list. So, yeah, if you have multiple games for review, I'll think of a way to ask it in a way that is a multiple choice question. I'm looking for multiple choice, ideally. How do you prioritize? I'll offer a few options there. Yeah, good question, Jeff. Garrett says, have I played, I always mispronounce this one, but Troy, I read that there was a mechanism where everyone has a private objective, but all players still score everyone's private objective at the end, so you can kind of intuit what each other are thinking, or here's what other players are doing. And it sounds like a really interesting mechanism that could probably be implemented house ruled to most games with private objectives. That is a neat way to do it. I agree. I have played Troy. It gives you a great reason to pay attention to other players throughout the game. Yeah, it's been a while since I played it, but I agree that is a really cool mechanism. Johnny says, is it worth asking reviewers what is one thing you would change about the culture of board game reviewing to get a pulse on changes they want to see? You know, Johnny, I like the idea of having an open-ended question on this survey. I don't want to have a bunch of them because it's a lot of information for me to go through. Multiple choice is a little bit easier for me to parse, but I think that is a good open-ended question. What is one thing you would change about the culture of board game reviewing? Yeah, I'll make a note about that. One thing you would change. Great question there. Okay, Tabletop Games blog, someone who does reviews, says, I always disclose if I got a review copy and any other ties or links that I have to the publisher, designer, or anyone else linked to the game. I also never sell my review copies. That's interesting. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Like, what do you do with the review copies afterwards? And for the most part, as a publisher, from a publisher perspective, I don't really care what you do with the games afterwards. I understand that some reviewers might keep the game, some of them might give them to friends, might use them as giveaways. But I think there are cases where that can be abused. I think there are cases, unfortunately, where a very small number of reviewers have accepted games because they want to sell them, because they want to then make money off of those games on the back end. Their focus very rarely is less on the review and more on getting a free thing that they can then sell. There are, unfortunately, a few examples of that. But by and large, I don't think there's a problem with a reviewer selling a review copy afterwards. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I want to ask about that, but maybe I should. What do you think? What do you think? Mark says, do they want to dilute disinformation or add positivity to the industry, or maybe just get games for free? Oh, I see. So, what is their intent? What is their goal in reviewing games? What is your goal? Yeah. Like, are you trying to serve your audience? Do you feel like you're trying to serve the publisher? Yeah. Garrett points out that Rado does always preface his video with disclaimers. Yeah. Wendy confirms that she's attended CanTCon and agrees with William that it's small, fun, board game focused. That's awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. William says, so you don't consider keeping review copies of games as payment compensation? It is certainly a gray area. I don't consider it payment. No, I don't consider it payment. I consider it a necessity. If you're going to review a game, you need to have a copy of the game to review. I think it is a form of compensation if you're getting it for free. But I do think the reason I think it's different, William, is that here's how I think about it. I can't pay for groceries with a board game. I can't go to a grocery store and say, here's a board game, give me my groceries. Whereas money, you can do that. And so I consider games a free game in a different category than money in terms of payment. Really, I consider it much more on the side of if a reviewer is going to review a game, they need a copy of the game to review it. It is okay if the reviewer buys a game. I think it's wonderful when reviewers buy games and don't just get them for free. But William says, then I think it's the responsibility of the reviewers to disclose and clarify if they got money, just the game, or both. And really, I'm hoping, and I think that most reviewers are never offered money for a review. But legally, they should, if they are, they have to disclose that. And even if they are just receiving a copy of the game for free, legally, they actually do have to disclose that. So that is something I'm going to ask about to see what reviewers say. Are reviewers disclosing whether or not they got a free copy of the game for review? Joshua says, have I ever tried extending a box size for the punch boards during shipping? Once everything is punched, the box closes normally. Not sure if this impacts shipping. We do. Yeah, it's called the kind of lid lift. And there's a margin that is okay for us to do that. So it does happen. What it happened for a recent game too? Maybe one that's in the works right now. But yes, there is a certain so this happens with a couple. Oh no, it happened with Gears of Corruption. Gears of Corruption. If you get a copy of Gears of Corruption, you'll see that the lid of the box originally is up higher than it should be because you have to punch it down a little bit. I believe that's in Gears of Corruption. So yes, it does happen. There is a limit to how high that lid can go before it becomes easily damageable. Yeah. Thank you, David. It's not Troyes. It's not Troy. It's Twa. Twa. Thank you. So Austin says, I guess the question for reviewers may be, do you make a concerted effort to withhold your thoughts or opinion of a game when you are compensated for the video? I think that's a good way to put it. I don't want to lead them too much into what I think is the right answer, but yeah, do you make a concerted effort to withhold your thoughts or opinions of a game when you are compensated for the video? Yeah, and really, I think I'm just going to ask, like, do you ever post your opinions after being paid for non-review content? Like, if you're being paid for a playthrough or rules video, do you also post your opinions, and how do you disclaim that? Yeah, and Rodney, you're right. Rodney does a good job of that by just focusing on the rules. Yeah, and William says it would be interesting to know how much of their content is sponsored. It would help to know how important a channel takes their journalistic integrity. Yeah, I'm going to talk about sponsorships. I'll talk about that. And yeah. Sorry, just taking some notes here for this survey. I also want to keep the survey a reasonable length so they actually fill it out. Brandon says, I know professional reviewers must be overburdened with a lot of games and have an avenue to deal with the overflow, but taking them just to sell feels highly disingenuous. I absolutely agree. Yeah. Fortunately, I think that's incredibly rare, but it does happen. I hope the credible ones are passing them on to libraries, schools, etc. Yeah, I think a lot of that happens. A lot of games are passed on to convention libraries. Library. Actually, I have an article about libraries. Libraries actually rarely accept donations. Mostly libraries buy the things that you see in the library. They have a budget for it. But yeah, I agree. There are many things that you can do with a game after you decide that you don't want it anymore. And if you have accepted that game for free, there are probably some ethics as to what to do with it afterwards. So maybe it's worth asking. I don't know if there's, yeah. What do you do with the game after you reviewed it? I would be curious to know that too. Mark says, one major comment about Spanish Swap I see online is that there's confusion about the space themed stamps. Have you considered doing an online document where it lists tiles under each theme? That's a good question, Mark. I will look into that. We really did try to. That was one of the later changes we made in the process, to change a few space stamps to make them a little bit clear that they were the space stamps. And so if people have confusions about specific ones, I'd love to see photos of them so I can see where the confusion is. I think probably the biggest confusion is there might be one that has a vehicle on it. And so you wonder, is this a vehicle stamp or is this a space stamp? Even though it is set in space, I think it's pretty clear, but I would love to know the examples that aren't clear so I can try to clarify them. Nicholas says, as a publisher, I'm hyper aware that reviewers super need financial help. They're in a tough financial situation, but the conflict of interest this creates is tricky. I'm really struggling with this. Yeah. I agree. That is tricky, and I think it's tricky for reviewers too. In terms of, like, if a reviewer is trying to make money from advertising, that means that clicks and views really matter for them, if that is their focus. And so that can lead reviewers to do things that don't necessarily serve their audience, but serve the algorithm, clicks and views, and getting more ad money. Which I don't want to share my opinion on that because it isn't all that relevant. But I think it is a question of asking yourself, who am I serving here as a content creator, as a reviewer? Who am I serving? What's my point here? Am I trying to serve my audience, or am I trying to serve an algorithm? Or am I trying to serve my wallet? Am I making this? Am I putting my family's income in one bucket here, and therefore complicating things? I don't know. The questions for reviewers to ask there. Yeah. Paul says, how many times do you play a game before you actually give your thoughts on it? Paul, I don't have that one on there yet. I'm curious about that too. How many times do you play? And I'm asking that. I'll ask that, I think, without judgment, because I know, like many of you, you've probably played a game and formed an opinion on it after one play, and that's okay. We're allowed to have our opinions about games after one play. Is there a certain level of journalistic integrity about doing that, like posting your opinion about a game and maybe not making it clear that it's just your first impression? Maybe not. Tabletop Games Vlog says, if I ever got paid by a publisher, designer, or someone else from the industry, I won't review their games. For example, I have demoed for Asmodee, so I no longer review any of their games or any of their studios. And that is, I think that's high level integrity. That is something that I want to talk about in the post. My personal take on it is that as long as that information is disclosed, I think that's ethical. But I think it is also ethical, and maybe a higher level of being ethical, to do what you're doing and say, if I've ever received money from this publisher or designer, I just can't review. I can't ethically just share my opinions about future games from them. That is something I'm going to ask about on this survey. Andrew says, thanks for your team's work on Stamp Swap. Our family has really enjoyed it. Our time with it so far. Excited to introduce it to our friends tomorrow night. Thank you, Andrew. I'm so glad to hear that. And thank you for sharing it with your friends as well. That's awesome. Mark says, the congrats on Rolling Realms Digital. Steam version is much more stable now, and the iPad version is out. Have I considered putting Rolling Realms on Board Game Arena? I think it is one of the games that we have mentioned to Board Game Arena as something that we could put on there, but they haven't prioritized it yet. They have to find developers for every single game that goes on there. Chris says, I think context is important. He's just starting his content channel, but I chime in to say that even when posting on social media, a reviewer can or should put paid content to note to post when compensated, either monetarily or with a free copy of the game. I agree, Chris. Yeah, legally, I think that is required. I wish that places like Instagram could differentiate between paid content and something along the lines of, I received a free copy of the game. In my mind, I view them as different. And so I wish there was the option there to differentiate between receiving money, versus receiving a free game. Yeah, but I agree. I think that legally, I think that is actually required. Julie's question is, do you review games that feature themes or game mechanisms you don't like? Oh, I like that, Julie. Yeah. And actually, one of the questions that I want to ask that's similar to that, but different, I want to ask both of them now, is, have you ever have you ever accepted a review copy or asked for a review copy and then chose not to review that game? And maybe why? Like what happened? What did you do with it? I think the highest level of integrity would be, if you accept a review copy, that you review it. Even if you don't like it. I know it isn't fun to make a negative review, but if you actively either sought it out or accepted it, I think it's your responsibility to actually review it. So let's see. I need to type out your question, Julie. Do you review games that feature themes or game mechanisms? Yeah. That feature themes, mechanisms that you don't typically enjoy. Yeah, great question there. Brianna says she works at a local game store managing the board game department, and we have an in-store game cafe and game library that I'm working to turn into a proper lending library, just to offer people more try before you buy opportunities. I think that's awesome. I think that is wonderful. And she says, just in case the reviewer is seeing this, your local game store may be able to help with that stack. And that's a great point, that offering something that publishers do. Stonemaier Games does this. Distributors do this, but offering more demo copies for stores to use with those extra review copies can be great. Darth Gruber says that all information is biased, paid or unpaid, so everyone needs to consume any news or reviews carefully. And I agree. I actually have an article about that a few years ago about the many different forms of bias. I think it is impossible to escape bias. Like, you'd have to live in a complete vacuum to not have any bias at all. But there are certain levels of bias that I think are worth disclosing. Yeah. Yeah, Johnny says, agreed on reviewing a game, even if you didn't enjoy it. I also hope that publishers would reward that integrity of a negative review by continuing to send games to that reviewer down the road. I 100% agree. And I also, my method is that I don't consume reviews of Stonemaier Games. I want to separate myself. I want to separate Jamey the human from Jamey the person who has a responsibility to people who are considering buying our games, and to the reviewers who hopefully create as unbiased of reviews as possible. So I don't want to know if a review is positive or negative. All I want to know is if you reviewed it. And so reviewers, there are many reviews probably on our website that are negative reviews of our games. And I don't know they're negative because I haven't watched them. I haven't reviewed them, and I continue to send games to those reviewers. And I obviously, like, the best level of integrity would be someone who could a publisher who could consume those reviews and see one negative review after another and still continue to send games to that reviewer. I would like to think I'm that person. I don't think I entirely am. And so I want to separate myself from that so that I do send reviews. I do send games to reviewers who have negatively reviewed our games in the past. Garrett says, I'm curious about engagement metrics on positive versus negative reviews. Do reviewers see an uptick on one versus the other if they track that at all? I almost don't have to ask that, Garrett, because I think, yes, negative, especially clickbaity negative reviews get a higher metrics, higher review rates. Yeah. Jan Williams says, would you prefer a reviewer to write a negative review to not reviewing a game that they like? I would prefer if a reviewer accepts a copy of one of our games for review, the only thing I'm asking them to do, if they've opted into that, if I've said, hey, I have Stamp Swap for review, do you want to review it? And they say yes, and they accept that review copy. The only expectation is that they actually review it. Everything else is fair game. And I want them to review it, whether or not they like the game. I just want them to review it. Yeah. Another question here from Tabletop Games blog. Do you contact the publisher or designer before publishing a negative review to give them an opportunity to clarify questions or talk about known problems with the game that will be resolved in future versions or by errata? That's an interesting question. Yeah. Do you ever contact publisher, designer before posting? And that's a good question, because I don't think there necessarily is a right or wrong answer to that question. I think it is something that you can or cannot do, but I think it's good for us to know. Brianna says, as a reviewer, how are you careful to differentiate between not a good game and not your style of game, but otherwise good? Yeah, my preference when anyone dislikes something, that you say, oh, it isn't for me, or I don't like this, versus this is bad. I think owning it, taking ownership over our likes and dislikes, our subjective opinions, I think is really important. And so I like that differentiation quite a bit. Neil says, am I attending Essen? So Stonemaier Games is attending Essen. My coworkers Dave and Alex will be at Essen, but I won't personally be there at Essen Spiel this year. What else? I had a few other random topics today. Oh, I wanted to celebrate Rolling Realms Redux, which is under a stack of stuff on my desk right now, but I can share the dice. Here are the dice in Rolling Realms Redux. The retail release date was last Friday. The English worldwide retail release date of Rolling Realms Redux was last Friday. My next live playthroughs, I think, will be next week. But if you've been waiting to get this from your local retailer, it is available, or it is either available or it can be available if you ask them and say, hey, I'd like to buy this from you. They can order it from GTS, our distributor here in the US, or their distributor in other regions. Well, yeah, just fun stuff. We played a few games of the new Star Wars deck building game. And we're going to play, I think, with Darth Vader in there in the near future. We play with the new Clone Wars stuff, so Darth Vader isn't in there. But to honor James Earl Jones passing away at the age of 93 this past week, we were going to try to play with Darth Vader, because you can actually mix and match the factions from the original Star Wars deck building game. One of my favorite games of the last few years. We've started watching Rings of Power. We're watching Con Man, a show with Alan Tudyk, which I think one of you recommended a while ago. So we were looking for a new lunchtime show, and that was on the list from a recommendation from a while ago. And what was this? Oh, yeah, just a fun little note. Yesterday was 9/10, September 10th, is the anniversary of Stonemaier Games kind of officially becoming a company, the 12th anniversary. That was our original Kickstarter for viticulture back in 2012. Can you believe that? 2012. We reached our funding goal on September 10th. So that's when it turned from a possibility to a reality. And that's what I consider like the moment that we became a company at Stonemaier Games. So yesterday was our 12th anniversary in that way. Garrett says, I think Shelfside has an interesting scoring method where they do personal scores and a recommender score where they evaluate it as best they can outside their preferences. Yeah, that's a neat way to do it. I like that. I like that. I also, honestly, I like the way that Alex at Board Game Go. Alex was noted on this article that I recently wrote, but Alex does what I liked, what I disliked, and what I can see others not liking. I think that's a good combination of things. Kim says, I've seen negative reviews that still make me want the game. What one person considers negative or deal breaker isn't always something that bothers me. Like I have no problem with multiplayer solitaire. Yeah, me too. When I play a Tableau builder, I want multiplayer solitaire. I don't want other players messing with my whatever I'm building. Yeah. Sean says, are you or your organization sponsored for this review? This is a question for a reviewer. Are you sponsored for this review? I'm not sure how to ask this, but I love how you always share your favorite mechanisms of a game. How do you ask them to focus on that? How do you always share your favorite? How do you ask them to focus on that? I'm not sure I entirely understand that question, Sean. I should clarify that I am not a reviewer. I am a content creator and that I post content geared towards tabletop game designers. I almost never accept free stuff. And if I do, I disclose it. But I really essentially have a policy where I don't accept free stuff. I am posting the games that I have either bought or that friends have bought or that I played at a convention. And so I don't have anyone like asking me to do anything. It's my impetus as to what I talk about, when I talk about it, and how I talk about it. And I also intentionally, I'm not reviewing. I am only trying to focus on my favorite mechanism. That is what's important to me for sharing design stuff. Chris says, some of my favorite films with James Earl Jones. Really, I mean, Star Wars is definitely at the top of the list. There's another movie that was mentioned in the list that I had forgotten that he was even in. But yeah, Star Wars is a big one for me. Corey says, I'm excited to see more from Chris Porter, Chris's new YouTube channel, with the nerdy method of evaluating games. Nerdy is an acronym. I like that. Chad says, does Megan have a chocolate of the day? I think it'll be the tartlets that we're picking up today for the special treat. Oh, yeah. Mark says, did I miss the segment about playtesting? Playtesting was in the subject here. Yeah, not really a segment. I was just going to say that I've been playtesting a lot of different things recently that have been fun to playtest and run blind playtest for and get blind playtest data for. So not much to say about that. Just stuff going on behind the scenes of Stonemaier Games. Sean says, how do you ask reviewers to focus on their favorite mechanisms? That's interesting. That is something that I would not feel comfortable asking as a publisher of a reviewer. Yeah, I think that would not be good integrity for publisher to say, hey, please focus on your favorite mechanisms. I wouldn't do that. I hope people don't do that. Yeah. Oh, that reminds me though, I want to ask reviewers about timing of reviews. Like how much input do they get from publishers in terms of the timing? But anyway, we're a little over time today. Thank you for joining me for all these questions, these answers, your questions, your answers. I had a great time talking with you, and I will be back next Wednesday as usual and next week for some Rolling Realms playthroughs. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow. Video tomorrow about how to teach Stamp Swap so you can know my method for teaching it in case you are looking to share our new game Stamp Swap with other people. Take care. Have a great day. Bye.